Our last application, which we hope will be funded, we just went in, we've actually broadened it. But the way we have really had the Birch overlap with the SCORE, this monthly seminar series where we have our SCORE investigators presenting their research, our pilot project people presenting their research, the Birch scholars and their mentors come. And so they actually get to see, and some of their mentors are from very different. We have somebody working in lupus, which is more, common in women than men, and so working on the neuropsychiatric sequelae of lupus in adolescents. So she's brought in a mentor from endocrinology, a mentor from pediatrics, who come now to our monthly meetings and give us incredible input into into the things that are being presented. So the SCORE investigators come, the Birch scholars come, the Birch mentors come. So now, as you can tell, we've got a larger and larger group now coming every year, a larger and larger group of people that now know each other across the campus and say hello, and that have, people are running assays for different people. I mean, it's really become a very active and interactive and productive group. We also have a monthly journal club. Birch scholars sometimes end up working on SCORE projects. We also really encourage collaboration across the Birch projects because we do have basic science people and clinicians in the same room talking about what they're doing. So somebody will runs an assay for BDNF and says, why don't we try to assay that in your patient population? Our pediatrician who is interested in these neuropsychiatric sequelae of lupus hadn't really thought about doing neuroimaging, but we had neuroimaging people in the room that said, we need to image these folks. And so anyway, it's really been very productive interactions. And then along came the CTSA. I've got 5 minutes, and I'm also the PI on our CTSA. Most of you guys probably know what this is. It's a Clinical and Translational Science Award, which basically is your institutional home. Most of you are probably in places that have CTSAs. It's your institutional home for clinical and translational science. It's basically a very large NIH initiative that was that came about because of this idea that really things were not getting from the basic science laboratory into advances that really changed medicine and really improved the health of our nation quickly enough. And so the idea about CTSAs is that they will, basically strategically place resources in some of these areas where we've really had a bottleneck in terms of research getting from the bench to humans. And so they have, all CTSAs have multiple programs, including things like biomedical informatics. They all have a big focus on interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary research. They all have regulatory support, trial design, ethics. So there's a number of programs that they have. And basically, their overall mission is to facilitate clinical and translational research by providing research support services, research training, and improving access to research-related resources. So when you think about this, this program has a tremendous amount in common with any of the things that you may be trying to do in women's health, in either your education or your research efforts. Tremendous overlap gives really the opportunity to leverage these CTSA resources for program enhancement. And I think because I did lead both that initiative and our SCORE and Birch, I was able uniquely to see exactly all the places where I could fit my programs in and really get extra resources for my investigators and for my scholars. One of the things that our CTSA, and that CTSA usually has a lot of resources, both NIH as well as institutional resources poured into this, because it is for your entire campus. But every CTSA has its own K award built into it. It has to have a K award. And you can believe that your CTSA has developed a lot of programs that are designed to help their K awardees be successful, because if their K awardees aren't successful, they're not going to get refunded. And so there's no reason why those K awardee resources should not be available to your Birch awardees. There's absolutely no reason in the world. So you just need to figure out what they are and what they're doing. Ours, for instance, they started a K awardee club, which basically has monthly meetings for networking. You can request things like a STAR consultation where you bring your project in and you put in for the request for the consultation with an abstract of your project. They will bring in experts from across the campus at their expense and their trouble coordinating it to talk with you about the best approach to your project. CTSAs have their own pilot project program that is, usually there to fund interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary work. Ours has an annual mentorship retreat. Again, in the interest of making their K awardees more successful, we have a K2R program so that those people who are in their K award trying to move into their first R01, they meet weekly, they go over their projects together and really have had a tremendous amount of success. Our people are involved in all of that. And then certainly one of the main things CTSAs provide is support for research corps and research navigation and regulatory support, bioethics support, all sorts of things. So that's one of the things I would just encourage people to do in general is find out everything that's going on in your CTSA, find out what things they're supporting, and make sure that you're getting your fair share, because a lot of that is just about awareness. And this is just sort of my graphic of it. I really think CTSA has tremendous amount of overlapping mission and resources that we should all be taking advantage of in terms of training and research support. And then just, I think opportunities to expand funding. It was so interesting to hear about Melissa's central role in terms of the VA initiative. But VA and Department of Defense have a lot of money these days, and we don't usually think of those when we're thinking about women's health initiatives. But there's a lot of opportunity there. So I think, again, programs like CTSA and those things really help us. I think we can leverage those to find broader opportunities and access all kinds of potential resources to advance the cause of gender-specific research in women's health. So in conclusion, I think advocacy for what we're doing and awareness of what is available on your campus and at a national level in terms of resources, just stressing finding out about your CTSA resources, and then leveraging its existing strengths. I think it's really, really important to partner with wherever there's an area on your campus that's strong. If they're not doing gender-based research, they should, unless it's like prostate cancer or something. But you should be in there. You should be in there talking to them about what it is that they could, how you could work together with them. Again, that's been one of our strategies, is to recruit these seasoned investigators and persuade them to explore gender differences in whatever other areas they're in, and then certainly working across mentorship and training programs, because there's a lot of commonalities when you're trying to mentor and train people, regardless of the area that you're mentoring in. And I think with that, I'll finish, and so we can move on to discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Brady, for that wonderful talk on how you were able to build resources starting from 2002 till now. You keep getting bigger and bigger and better. I'd like to have all the panelists come to the front, and we will take questions. I'm sure we must have some questions after the whirlwind tour of women's health across the U.S. And we've got microphones in one microphone to the left of me.
That's it. That's it right there.
So.
Is it on? That mic on? There's no mic. Okay.
I'm Judy Reichensteiner from University of Colorado. And my question to all three of you is, as you talk about the initiatives that are going on at your institutions, all of which sound very exciting, it makes me wonder if there could be ever a women's health fellowship that would be a nationally organized type of fellowship where, we could recruit, from all over the country, look for a fellow, and somebody could come as part of another track or area and do it to your women's fellowship. We had that in vascular medicine where, I was involved in this, developing a 2-year vascular medicine program for people who wanted to come in the cardiology field and do vascular medicine. But I don't know exactly where it would be, but I'm excited by the idea of having sort of a national network of women's health fellows.
Well, I'm excited with it too. I mean, I think different places can do it in different ways. And I do think that Missy's comments about trying to set some kind of national criteria, I'm a little bit concerned about ownership. I'm not so, does medicine own it, does OBGYN own it, who owns it? And I'm not sure that anybody has to own it. I mean, maybe we can have some kind of an umbrella organization that sets itself up and sets some kind of competencies and minimum standards. We've been taking fellows to our program. So we'll take people from any of 5 specialties, and the funding, basically the funding, they do a 8.5 week of clinical work, and the funding comes out of what they do clinically. And the Department of OBGYN picks up half their salary, and the other departments, so psychiatrists picking up half the psychiatrists. And I mean, last year we had 21 applicants in family medicine, and we were planning to take 1, and they were so good that the chair of family medicine and I said, well, we have to take 3. And we convinced the hospital to kick in to pay for the 3rd one. So I mean, there are different ways of doing it. And we have an organizing committee that includes some interns, some other people. They select the people, and so I think it's very possible. And I think it's something we should talk about at this meeting. This is the meeting where we can talk about women's health fellowships and subspecialty training in women's health.
Board certified?
What I would say is, I think there are 2, when you talk about fellowships, there's really 2 different issues. One is whether, and as Tim played out, there are people who are interested in clinical fellowships to do that 1 extra year to get a lot of clinical experience, and then there are people who are interested in developing themselves as academic physicians. The academic physician piece is, I think, harder to fund because it cycles back to what we've all talked about, that if you're going to be successful, you have to have that 75% research time protected. And, to be honest, it's one of the problems we've run into in our Birch, and I'll switch hats here for the Birch, is the amount of funding is sort of fixed, and different specialties come a little more expensive than others. We have some social scientists, and we can fund them really easily. We've had a lot of trouble actually with some of our OB/GYN fellows.
Because transplant surgeon.
Yeah, well, and transplants, we have not had one of those yet, but they're it's very expensive. And to do enough clinical work to fund somebody, fellows are relatively easy because they don't expect to be funded. Junior they expect to be at PGY whatever, although a transplant would be PGY, 27, yeah. So, but to fund faculty to get research skills, that's really hard. That's where the Birch and the SCORE and the worker have been so wonderful. And that's faculty, not fellows.
I mean, it's the job of the clinical leaders. It's the job of the institution. I don't think it's not the fellow's job. I mean, we need to decide what we want to do as leaders who want to have a specialty develop a subspecialty of women's health. And then we need to figure out ways to fund it. Sometimes hospitals will fund it. One of our first research fellows was an internist who happened to be a gastroenterologist. And she spent her research year asking women, did they prefer a woman or a man doing their colonoscopy, which was a really interesting research project. And another research project looking at the practices of internists, OB/GYNs, family physicians, referring for patients for colonoscopy. Really interesting research projects. Well, she was a PGY7. It doesn't take much for a colonoscopist, endoscopist, gastroenterologist to cover her salary as a fellow. It's more difficult for an internist, as a general internist, or a general psychiatrist, or a general family physician. Anybody who's procedurally based can 1 day a week pay for their fellow's salary and protect their research time.
The other comment I want to play off on what Tim said is, I think one of the things that has really plagued women's health is the issue of ownership. Way back when, in the early days, when there was a move to try and get women's health certified as a specialty, that's where the ownership issues really played out. I think we are in a much better position now than we've been in many years as an interdisciplinary field. And I think some of the programs like the Birch and the SCORE and the Worker and the CTSAs more recently have made that much less threatening, perhaps. But I do think that remains an issue.
Well, I think, Susan, you might want to mention, but I mean, at this meeting, there's a formation of the American Academy of Women's Health Professionals. And I think that'll be a perfect opportunity to have a oversight body, maybe even an accrediting body for these kinds of activities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll be talking more about it tomorrow, but we are forming at this meeting an Academy of Women's Health. And everyone who comes to the Congress this year will have the opportunity to be a charter member. And it will be a group of interdisciplinary international association of physicians, nurses, other health professionals who are interested in women's health, education, research, and practice. So I hope you all join, and that would certainly be an opportunity.
Good afternoon. As I was sitting here listening to these three very interesting talks, I had no idea all of this was going on. It's such a stark contrast, I think, to what we're seeing in the press about women's health. And I wondered what kind of role or what kind of efforts you're making in your own communities to kind of educate people more about the importance of women's health, not only for themselves, but the family and the community.
I'll just take the first pass and say that, I mean, certainly it is depressing and demoralizing to be revisiting some of the issues that we've been revisiting in the press in the last month or two. Our Center for Health Law and Ethics does a symposium every year, and this year women's health was their issue. And about 3 months ago, they asked me if I would give a talk on ethical issues in women's health. And I thought, well, I should do this. And the guy who asked me is a friend of mine, and I thought, okay, I'm really not quite sure what I'm going to talk about. I have no problems now. I have. And so I think that one of the things I would say is I think in many respects, the Fuhrer has done the cause of women's health in many respects a service, the way it has played out. I think there are still battles to be fought, but I think that advocacy, interestingly, advocacy has become an issue that we have started to address in our residency training as a core competency. Haven't actually taken it to the fellow level yet, or scholar level yet, but I think advocacy as a skill, how to meet with your representatives, how to get involved, is a really important skill for everything we're talking about. And I see that as a real opportunity.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comment. It was a very timely one. And one of the things that our center is probably way back at the beginning, we partnered with a community organization in South Carolina it was called the Center for Women, started by this very charismatic woman who's a businesswoman, but and a lot of her focus really was on economic development and helping women who wanted to start small businesses. And she moved into sort of more legislative. We have like the lowest number of women legislators. I mean, I'm from South Carolina, so it's like, there's a lot of work to be done there. But so we partnered with her and said, hey, you're doing great work. We'd like to be sort of the medical arm, and so one of the things that we've done over the last couple of years is we do a quarterly. It's for the community, but we'll talk about some sort of women's issue in a layperson, dialogue format. And it's been very well attended, but in terms of what you were just talking about, I feel like we're sort of preaching to the choir, because it's well attended by women and other people that are probably already very interested and sort of convinced the importance of women's health and dismayed by the current. So your comment just really kind of inspired me. I think we need to go back and maybe start getting a little bit more activist in our approach with this.
So we've spent a lot of time in the last few years talking across our educational programs about the importance not only of clinical training, research, and education, but also about leadership and advocacy. And we've been using leadership and advocacy training and talking about the fourth academic stool for a while. We have a program for sexual rights and reproductive justice now that's quite active and very involved in advocacy. And they'll be presenting a poster here this week. But, I think in terms of what's happening now, and I grew up in the 60s reading Our Bodies Ourselves like everybody in the room. I think what's interesting is that I think, first of all, there's a much larger critical mass of people who are interested in women's reproductive issues in 2012 than there was in 1960. Secondly, we've all been immunized. And the anamnestic response, I think, was extremely powerful. I mean, it didn't take long for a huge response from the people who are interested in women's reproductive health. And I think I think we are moving back. These are issues that have been revisited, but I think there's a huge number of people who are extremely well informed, who have been trained by these interdisciplinary programs, who are going to say, excuse me. And I think we've seen that response much more quickly than we ever would have had before. And I think this is a wonderful time for women's health. We have the real opportunity to be in the spotlight again and to demonstrate the evidence that we've been generating over the last 30 years to support women's health.
We'll take one last question, and then we'll have, yes, sure.
Through the microphone.
I'm a DNP student, and the very first course we took was health policy, and we had to interview a politician about women's health, and it was very interesting. It was a great learning experience.
I think Dr. Ray, if someone at the mic.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Amy Grover from Virginia Commonwealth University, and I may have misunderstood Dr. Johnson in your presentation, but you talked about the need to recruit individuals who have had a long history of research and success, because it's difficult to teach somebody later on. And we had just done some research about, and we were surprised about the serendipitous nature of many women and their journey into academic medicine. And so I was wondering, I see we focus so much on residents and later. Do we need to do more about women's health and addressing that in the medical school population and earlier, so that they can think about it earlier and they can start getting that background so that they can be successful later? And then how do we pull in potentially late bloomers? Some of these women who may have never considered a research career, who have changed their minds and changed their directions and are really passionate about what they do.
Well, I guess I'd say it's never too late. I mean, I think you have to get people who at least have an interest and a concept that they're interested in getting involved in research and scholarship. And if they've had some exposure as undergraduates in undergraduate research opportunity programs, or as medical students in research programs that have been exposed to some of the scientific methods of research, I think it helps. But obviously re-entry is a possible thing as well. But no, we do a lot of stuff with undergraduate. We teach 3 undergraduate courses at the University of Michigan with large numbers of students, 200 students. So I mentioned that we have 24 residents in our program. 5 of those residents were my students as undergraduates, and they're now my residents. Only one of them went to the University of Michigan Medical School. So I mean, we can do a lot of work in undergraduate education around women's health. And most of us in this room are at academic medical centers that are closely affiliated with undergraduate universities where we can do this kind of education and teaching, and where we can take those undergraduate students into the kind of research programs, and they can do summer programs and do this kind of stuff. So I think it's really important to do that.
We're going to need to wrap this session up, but we will have more time for discussion at the end. So really hold your questions. I know that the discussions are getting really exciting. And Dr. Klein would like to make an announcement as well about the directory.
Yeah, there's 3 things with regard to this session. Number one, I just wanted to make sure everyone is aware that there's a directory of women's health residencies and fellowships that is published annually in the Journal of Women's Health. It comes out in the May issue. It is open access, and it lists all of these wonderful women's health fellowships that you're hearing about. The other thing is, to help us plan for future programs, we're passing around a sign-up sheet, so please make sure that you sign in, because it's important that we're able to show just how much interest there is. And the last thing is, as Tina Trott can speak to, there are so many groups that have this same passion. There is a nascent effort, it's not so nascent now, there is a national effort called Advancing Women's Health, the Advancing Women's Health Initiative, and a group of people from around the country have been working to help incorporate sex and gender-based medicine into the medical school curricula. And there will be a group that will be meeting with LBME in the fall, the licensing board that helps craft the questions that are asked of medical students to make sure that they're asking about sex and gender medicine. So, you know, this question that Amy Grover asked is very pertinent, but hopefully our efforts will coalesce, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Klein. And a round of applause. I know one of our speakers had to take off because she has another talk. Thank you for the first panel. And Dr. Clayton will now be moderating the second panel, and Dr. Willow Pequenot is our first speaker.
So, John, we're supposed to have a 5-minute break here. Are we going to not do the break for people?
No, let's go ahead and have a 5-minute break. That sounds good. And we're really going to hold you to that.
Where's the sign-up sheet right now? Is it going this way? Exactly. Good I was interested in
You did great, Karen.
So we are just starting. Oh, now you're not going to down. You're not going to open everything around here. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, we're going to reconvene here for the second panel. I'm Janine Clayton, and I'm so delighted to be here. So I'd ask the folks that are milling about to try to find a seat. That was fantastic response to the first panel, and we're going to switch gears slightly to talk about a little different perspective related to women and women in biomedical careers and women's health. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. The title of our panel is Strategies for NIH Grant Success. And our first speaker is Willow Pequenot. Willow is the Associate Director for the International HIV/STD Prevention Research in the Division of AIDS at NIMH. And she told me I could tell you, everyone gets confused with her name. So Pequenot is Huguenot, right? Okay, French Huguenot derivation. And you know, instead of doing the long introduction, I'll tell you the Willow without a W at the end is because she was expected to be a boy, and that would have been Willis. And so we're happy that she's Willow. So please welcome Willow Pequenot.
I just told Janine those are the only two things I ever get asked about myself. I thank the conference organizers for inviting me back to speak again, because that means I must have said something that was useful last year, and so I hope I can repeat that. Last year with a colleague, I went to Howard University for over a 6-week period and did an hour-and-a-half grant writing session, grantsmanship session there. And at the end of the 6 weeks, my colleague and I felt that we had just scratched the surface. So with only 15 minutes, I'm going to give you my take-home message first, just to be sure I get that. And these, as I finish the talk, will mean more to you. But you need to develop your specific aims first. That really guides your application. Contact your project officer. When seeking TA, be sure you listen more than you talk. Keep your proposals on two pages until you have finished working out the logic. I have seen so many people who are beginning grant writers get lost in their words, and then they end up with an application that's inconsistent at the beginning with the end. Be patient and persistent, and do not rush back in with a revision. And the second thing, this is not a marketing talk, because as a federal employee, I don't get any royalties or anything. But this is a book on how to write a successful research grant application that was written by feds who are a part of the system and actually developed many of the guidelines, and experienced researchers who've been very successful. If you got a packet, there's a coupon 12. The coupon is in 12 if you want to order the book. I'm going to go through the first few things because this is just the overview of the talk, which also lays out for you some of the things that you will need to do as you develop your grant application. Now, the first thing that's important is the funding opportunity announcement. And there are two different kinds. There's the request for applications, which indicates that it's a very high program priority for the institutes that sign on to it. But there's only one receipt date. And it has a little advantage for you because the review group will all be focused on the topic of the grant applications that come in under this. But just because you find the funding opportunity after the RFA has closed, the institutes continue to be interested in those topics, so don't be discouraged. The other one is the program announcement, which is just a broader call to the field, and it's the receipt date is the 3 standing dates for that. In the case of AIDS, but everybody is different, it's September 7th, January 7th, and May 7th. Now here on this, it indicates how you can find out about these funding opportunity announcements. It's very user-friendly. You can search by topic and by mechanism and so forth. Even though we put out a call for things, it's still possible for you to come up with your own novel idea that doesn't really respond to any of the program announcements out there, although they're often very broad, so you can find one that you can wiggle into. But don't call your program officer and say, what RFAs do you have now? What are you funding? What are you interested in? We want to know what you're interested in. That's one of the ways that science moves forward. As I believe Missy said, you learn a lot at the bedside and in the clinic about what some of the important and emerging issues are that need to be attended to in research. Securing appropriate technical assistance, and if I convince you of nothing else this afternoon, it's that we are there, and it is our job to provide you with appropriate technical assistance to help you develop your application. We are the one other person who is as invested in your study as you are, because at the end of the year, we want to have a better research portfolio of grants than we did at the beginning of the year. And if you don't submit grants to our program, then we're not putting out the right announcements. We're not giving you the right kind of technical assistance. So please give us a chance. Now, how do you find us? Well, you can find us. Every funding opportunity has program or project officers listed in the back. That's the person who helped write that. And that's the person you should definitely call, because they can be a lot of help to you. And if you call and they aren't helpful, move on, because if they're not helpful when you want to develop an application, they're not going to be helpful to you during the review, after the review procedure is over and you get your summary statement and you're wondering how you can fix your application so that it will get a better scientific score the next time. They're not going to help you there, and they're not going to help you during the process of conducting your research. So there are a lot of people who will answer your questions, so find those. Now, you are going, as much as you need to seek technical advice and consult your colleagues and put together a research team, you need to remember that it's your name that will appear as the PI, and your name will be on every page of the grant application. So you are ultimately responsible. So no matter who's giving you the advice, if you don't think that it's correct, that it's not what you want to do, you need to follow your own guidance, because you'll be held responsible for what you write and what you submit. Now, a couple of people that you need to approach early, I feel, in this process,
is your statistician. Get your statistician before you've worked out your design, because that person is going to tell you what the latest techniques are, so that you can kind of collect the data that will permit the statistician to help you analyze your data in the best possible way. The next person that you should get to know early is the person in the institutional grants office. That is the office that is actually going to submit your application. Now that it's an electronic process, that's the person that will push the send button. And you want that person rooting for you. And you should go early and indicate to them that you're intending to submit this application, and how do they want to work with you. Do they want updates? Do they want it a month in advance? Whatever, so that you can have that person as part of your team. Don't go running in an hour before it's due, because they won't be able to accommodate you. As I said, work out the logic. Keep it short. Keep it in bullet forms. Once you have worked out your application in bullet forms, and you know what your aims are, and what your hypotheses are, and what methods, and what your theoretical framework is, it will then be a lot easier to sit down and write a coherent application. The table of contents for a grant, if you look at it, it's quite long. The grant itself probably ends up being about 100 pages, somewhere around that, because there are a lot of pieces of the application that are required, but are not really part of what we call the PHS 398. That is the designed research study itself. That's only about 12 pages, depending on what mechanism you're applying to. So when we talk about writing the research grant, remember, we focus on those 12 pages, but there are a lot of other parts to the grant, and you need to have somebody on your team or in your office who can help you negotiate all those technical complexities. The outline for the specific research plan that is part of that's part of the 12 pages are just specific aims, background and significance, preliminary studies, research design and methods, human subjects, and the specific aims, I think, are the most critical part. You know, you should have, depending on how seasoned you are as an investigator and how complex your study is, 3 to 5 specific aims. But usually if you're a new investigator, 3 is about all you can handle. And if you start getting more than 5, then you need to triage them into primary specific objectives and secondary ones. The specific aims organize your application. In each section, you should discuss things in the same order that the specific aims are laid out. Background and significance. This is a really important part. This is the only place you can be emotional in your application. You have to grab those reviewers, and so that they feel your problem is really critical and really important. And if you don't conduct this study, there's a whole group of people who will really suffer because there aren't evidence-based programs for them. So it's an important point. In the rest of it, you need to be highly technical, no adjectives, no adverbs, and the rest of it. No emotional. The preliminary studies, they don't care what you've done in your life. All they want is the studies that relate to the application you're preparing and what you learned from conducting that study that relates to how you will conduct this study. That's all they want. Don't just throw in everything thinking it makes you look more productive. It just makes you look confused. Then, of course, the research design and method. That's extremely important. You know, grantsmanship is necessary but not sufficient. If you don't have a good research plan, there's no way that the review is going to go well for you. So, and be sure that this is all very coherent and your plan follows from your specific aims and that the methods are appropriate for what you're doing. Human subjects research, I've been given the 2-minute warning, so I move on here because the game's about over. The specific aims are really critical because they provide the reviewer kind of with a roadmap. They can read your specific aims. I can read your specific aims, and I know exactly where you are in your thinking. And the specific aims tell the reviewer, oh, this is going to be a clinical trial, a randomized clinical trial. There's going to be a control group. Or it indicates to them, oh, this is a qualitative study. This person is just beginning to explore this study. So it tells the reviewer what kinds of parts of the study they're going to be. Yeah, we've done that. All right, those are all clear. A research team is really critical. And I advise people to develop a grid. Look at your study and decide what kind of expertise you need along the top. And then along the side, list the colleagues that you want to put on your team. And then put a check mark for everything that they have expertise in, just to be sure that you're covering all the expertise that you're needed. You don't know how many times we get applications and we get the summary statement back and someone says, well, you don't have X, Y, or Z expertise. There's no way you can do this study. Let's see. Be careful about loading your study up with too many people. And their consultants can play a very important role. But you should use consultants carefully. You know, sometimes you want a consultant for a week in the beginning to help you design your intervention. And then you might want a measurement person to come in after you've collected all the data to help you understand what the scores on these tests mean given your study population and data. And my time is up, so I thank you very much. And you have my phone number, and please take me up on my offer to answer your questions. And if you didn't get a package, just send me a little note, and I'll try and get you one. And I think the rest of my talk, while I won't have my melodious voice, is self-explanatory.